7. I probably am closer to like 6'6.5". My younger brother is actually taller than I am, so he's about another inch taller than I am. And he's probably got half the weight, so he's very skinny. So I am a youth pastor at Alderbrook, and so Tony invited me here, which was amazing, and I'm really happy to be here. And this is going to be awesome. We're talking today about temptation. So, who here has ever been tempted before?
100%.
Yes, absolutely. Temptation is a big thing. What are some things, just throw different things that people struggle with in general? Questions, yeah? Yes, Tony.
Anger issue.
Ooh, anger.
Oh.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, so lots of different things. Actually, we see in here Jesus is tempted by several things as well, which is crazy to think about. If God being tempted, if God can be tempted, we can. So I'm going to read this section of Matthew right now. So if you guys want to follow along in your Bibles, it's Matthew 3:16 to 4:11. All right, and we can go to the next slide, I believe. Yeah, so in my youth group, the kids are really bad at bringing their Bibles, but we also don't have a stack of Bibles, so I have to put it on the screen. So if you guys want to follow on the screen, you can too. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love, with whom I am well pleased." Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, 'Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone.'" Jesus answered him, "It is also written, 'Do not put the Lord your God to the test.'" Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give to you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" Then the devil left, and angels came and attended him. All right, so you can go next slide. And so we're going to ask 3 questions today. So question number 1 is, how do we approach temptation? 2, how do we prepare for temptation? And 3, how do we overcome temptation? So lots of fun stuff, I'm sure. Anything, I'll again just ask, as we go into the first part, which is approaching temptation. Yes, this is my struggle with temptation. So I guess like a part of, speaking of temptation and like we've all been tempted before, so I'm going to sort of share one of my stories. So have you guys, do you guys know what sour jujubes are? Do you guys know what regular jujubes are? Okay, so there's a little candy, so good. I actually have some here today. So I went to the Dollar Tree. Do you guys know what the Dollar Tree is?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, I'm from Abbotsford, so. So they had 1 pack of these for $1.25. So I did what any regular person would do, and I bought 8 of them. Because I thought, I really like jujube, sour jujube. These are amazing, and I will, eat them very over a long period of time. This was at the beginning of the summer, so I was like, probably last me the whole summer. And a week later, I'd eaten all of them. So that was quite a bit. So that's one thing. Food's always been something I struggle with. So here, I will hand out some of these to you guys.
Yeah.
So. All right, and that's just because if you guys have never tried these before, they are incredible. So, yeah. The whole day. Yeah, they are good, right? And apparently they're sweetened with real fruit juice, or whatever that means. Yeah, so I have struggled with temptation. I have not yet overcome my juju eating temptation. Next slide. Okay, so approaching temptation. So going back to Matthew and going back to the text that we wrote, it says that Jesus is led to be tempted. In fact, it says, Jesus was led by the Spirit to be tempted. So I've really struggled with this when I've been thinking about it over the past, because, God is sort of leading us into temptation, especially when in the Lord's Prayer it says, lead us not into temptation, right? And so there's that sort of thing there. And so I've thought a lot about it, and I think that in our culture, sometimes, in my culture, I'm not sure about necessarily, you guys' culture, but in my culture, temptation can sort of be understood as sort of a bad thing, like, oh, I was tempted, or, that must, I'm not holy enough, or, I need to pray more or something. So, so sometimes I feel that even though I succeed through a temptation, the very fact that I've been tempted shows that I'm somehow weak. Somehow I think that subconsciously I adopt the belief that if someone is mature enough to be a Christian, they should no longer have to deal with temptation. Like we get to this point where we're no longer tempted. But I think that at least in this passage, there's a different perspective being shown. First off, Jesus was tempted. In this passage we see the God who created the whole universe being tempted by his own creation, which is a fact that kind of boggles my mind. But I think it puts to rest any notion that we ever get too good to be tempted. This is the first point. Sorry. Hebrews 4:15 states that we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we did have one that had been tempted in every way, just as we are, and yet he did not sin. So temptation is not a sin, it's our reaction to the temptation. Everyone can and will experience this at many points in their lives. Remember, the devil, it says at the end, or in Luke rather, says he left Jesus until an opportune time. So this was a daily experience for him, or at least it is for us. So if you want to, next point maybe? Yeah, so temptation is universal is the first point, that we all experience it. Next, Jesus was led by the Spirit. So God is leading Jesus to be tempted by Satan, setting his prized possession up for an epic failure. So the question becomes, why would God do this? What is the benefit? So the easy answer would be to point to God's divinity, which is always a great Christian answer, is that God's God, we can't question him. And the Hebrews passage we just read, saying that the reason that the Spirit led Jesus to be tempted was so that he could sympathize with our human weakness. God led Jesus so that Jesus could experience everything that we experienced. And I think that that's a very true point, a very good point. However, I don't know if this is the whole story. So I think that the Spirit leads us into temptation because God uses temptation for his glory in the maturing process of a Christian. Next point. Sweet. So let's look back in the context in which this incident takes place. So the temptation of Jesus comes directly on the heels of his baptism, which is a moment of commitment and confirmation, where he was told by God something that is true for all of us, that we are children of God, that we are loved by God, and that he is pleased with us. So I think the reason that the Spirit led Jesus to be tempted is the same reason that he leads us through any trial in life. In 1 Peter 1:6-7, it says, "Though now for a little while you may have to suffer grief in all kinds of trials, these have come so they prove the genuineness of your faith." So temptation is a crossroads. It has the potential for good, so it has the potential to push us closer to God, or the potential to draw us away from God. In psychology, identity is the area of human development where we determine our foundational commitments. So this is like what we do for a career, who we're in relationships, and what we believe in. And when we talk about identity, at least psychologically, it's not something that is like, this is who I am now and forever. The process is constantly changing. As humans, we go through cycles of committing to something, experiencing this sort of crisis and confusion, and then committing again. So that's a good example of this. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like, if you're, have anybody you guys ever worked a job before? Or ever, do you guys have a favorite class? Okay, so you go to school, it's like, oh, who here likes math?
Yeah.
You guys are weird. Who here does not like math? There we go. Okay, nice. That's more like where I am. But
We're Asian.
okay, there you go. That makes sense. I could use your guys' help in my I'm doing a math class right now, and I'm struggling. But anyway, so have you ever been in a class like, oh, I really like this. This is fun. Like I could see myself maybe being an accountant or whatever you are. And then it gets to the point where it's like there's a really tough test. You're like, oh, there's just new concept or trigonometry. I could not get trigonometry. And you're like, wow, you know what? I'm in a point of crisis. I don't think I want to commit to that anymore. So it's kind of the same thing. Like we're constantly changing. And the same thing goes for our relationship with God too. So we commit to God, right? But then we have these moments of crisis. Do I really believe in God? This testing of faith. And that's what it's talking about here. So there's two types of commitment. There's a commitment to a new idea or person or a deeper, stronger commitment to an existing one. So that's where like I've already committed, but now I'm committing deeper. For example, I am now married 3 months ago. Yay. Before I started dating, I knew Sarah as my friend. And then it came to the point where I said, hey, do you want to go out on a date? And she said, no. And then I said, hey, do you want to go out on a date? And she said, no. And I said, hey, do you maybe some point down the road want to go down on a date? And she said, maybe. And then we went on a date. And then after that, I said, hey, do you want to marry me? And she said, yes, which is crazy. And then at the wedding, I said, will you marry me? And then she said, yes. So you see how like we're friends, and now we're engaged, and now we're married. So it's like deeper levels of commitment. So that's sort of what I'm trying to get at with God too, same idea. So this is what temptation can function as. It's a moment where we make a deeper, stronger commitment to God. As a result, we should change the way we approach temptation. It should not be a surprise to us when we are tempted. And when we are, we should look for the opportunity we have to confirm our belief through our actions. So a catchphrase for this, 2 clicks, I believe, on the slide. Yes, so when we are securest in Christ, we are surest to be tempted. So we saw Jesus, right, when he was closest to God, in that moment of, you are my son, I love you, and I'm well pleased with you. That's the point where he's tempted. So we should expect the same thing. So it's almost like a positive, right? The devil's not going to tempt you if he doesn't need to. Okay, so part 2 here. And driving blind. Okay, so how many people here can drive? Nice job.
He still has an end.
You still have your end?
I can drive. I got my motorcycle.
Okay, well here, I'll tell you a story from when I started driving. So when I turned 16 and got my L, my father decided to teach me how to drive. So most fathers take their children to a parking lot or maybe a back road, but not my dad. He believes the best place to learn how to drive is on the highway because you get a better feel for the car without the pressure of in-city traffic. So it's not like stopping and going. You're driving and, you can go back and forth, which is fair enough. I started my training after a volleyball tournament in Kamloops when we were on our way back home to Vernon. So I bet none of you guys have driven on this road, but it is, it's a single lane highway and it sort of connects the two cities. It's notoriously windy, like driving, slow down to like 35, go around a corner, and most of the places, like the lines have just completely worn off. So especially in the night, like it's just a terrifying road. So it was getting late, but my father coached me onto the freeway, and things were going well until it sort of got dark. It began raining, and I didn't know what to do. I had never really driven a car before, so I didn't know where the wipers were. And so I looked over to ask my father for help, and he was sleeping. So I'm like, oh my goodness, Dad, and like woke him up, to help me. So he woke up, turned on my wipers, and then went right back to sleep. So that was crazy. Needless to say, I didn't get the most in-depth driving instruction. On one occasion, actually, I was going up the Coquihalla in the winter. It was cold outside, so I brought my sweater, but now I was inside my vehicle. And the car warmed off, so I was getting really hot. So I went to take the sweater off, so I took my arms off, and then attempted to take it off, take the sweater off. However, the neck was a lot tighter than I thought, and so I ended up getting it stuck completely over my head. So I was driving, Yeah, still driving, but my face was covered by the sweater. So that was probably one of the scariest moments of my life, and that's why we have driving blind up here. Yeah, and I frantically pulled it off, but no one died, so that was good.
Yay, no one died.
No one died. Yes. Thank you.
Actually died.
When I was driving blind, I wasn't ready for what was coming at me. If the road curved, or if there was an animal or another car, I would have, I would have led to disastrous results. However, when I know what to expect, then things are far less dangerous, right? If I have both my hands on the wheel and I'm ready to move. Yeah, so this demonstrates how we should be prepared for temptation by taking off our blinders and being ready for what's coming our way. So there are a few things I want to point out. So next slide, and then number 1. Yes, okay. First, the root of temptation. So Satan tempts Jesus about a few different things. Some seem pretty silly. For example, bread or throwing himself down. I never get that one. Hey, throw yourself down out of the building. That doesn't seem very tempting to me, but whatever. The third temptation, if you bow down and worship me, shows the core of all temptation. Temptation, which is worship. When we are tempted, it asks us what we value. So for me with the jujubes, I value delicious candy goodness far more than eating healthy. Other times, we're asked if we value God or the things of this earth. So Richard Foster, who's a celebrated Christian author, wrote a book called Money, Sex, and Power, in which he identified the 3 main temptations we face as these 3 things. These are the areas in which temptations are most likely to occur, though they can take many forms. When we make life decisions, we need to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Is it possible that this is becoming temptation? So, going along back those lines, like money and sex and power, none of those things are in and of itself bad, right? There's no temptation that is inherently bad, but it's why, some of them are bad, but there's always 2 sides to the coin, of the coin, right? So, yeah, money can be a bad thing if all you're doing is working for it, and all I care about is money. But money can be a really good thing, right? We can help people in other countries. We can help, people in this country. So that's sort of what I'm saying. So finally, it is interesting that Satan uses Bible verses to tempt Jesus. This demonstrates how subtle temptations can be and how aware we have to be to spot them. So, yeah, temptations can come from anywhere, especially Bible verses. It also is a good reminder that you can never trust, not necessarily never trust, but you should always be listening. People can use Bible verses in the wrong way too, right? So always be studying for yourself and learning, and So, yes, this demonstrates how subtle temptations can be and how aware we have to be to spot them. But how do we do that? How do we become aware? Well, when I graduated high school, I got a job as a produce clerk at the local Cooper's Foods, which sadly is now Save-On, but same idea. My first week on the job, I was by myself and responsible for going through all the produce and picking out the bad ones. This came pretty easily when it came to things like apples or bananas, but sometimes I come across a fruit that I'd never heard of, let alone know whether or not it was rotten. So, does anybody know what a dragon fruit is? Yeah, of course you all know what a dragon fruit is. Wrong population. In my church, no one knows what a dragon fruit is. But anyway, so I brought one along.
Yes.
Yes.
Is it not peel them? You peel them?
Oh, that was one.
Yeah, here.
No, me.
Okay, so you will peel it, and then you put lime juice or lemon juice on it. I learned how to eat them now. Is he just opening it like that? Oh yeah, for sure. As long as it doesn't get on his pants or something. I've never seen someone open one without a knife. Just pass it around like that so people can see what it is. Okay, so like the dragon fruit, this led to a lot of confusion as I started putting out until I started putting out the new fruit. When I figured out what good fruit looks like, it's far easier to identify a bad one. So if we know what the dragon fruit looks like when it's ripe, and I hope that's a ripe one, then we know when it's old and it's a little bit darker and it's wrinkly. That's when we're like, okay, this is a bad one. I need to get rid of it now. So also, dragon fruit doesn't taste that good unless you put lemon juice or lime juice on it, in my opinion. So you might not be getting the full effect. The same goes for temptation. When we spend time with God and get to know Him on a personal basis, it becomes easy to know what is true and what has become twisted or rotten. Therefore, our relationship with God is very important when it comes to preparing for temptation. So a catchphrase to take away from this is 2, 3 down, I believe. One more. Yeah. So knowing God is the key to preparing for temptation, right? So like the fruit. Like if I want to watch out for the bad apples, the bad dragon fruits, I need to know what a good one looks like and tastes like. Okay. So part 3, combating temptation. So I've talked a bit before to my group about Joseph, and he lived a life of faithfulness. And one of the things that we really look at and admire in Joseph is the fact that he is tempted by Potiphar's wife, right? And then what's interesting is in that he literally, she's like, oh, come to bed with me. And he's like, no. And she's like grabbing him. And so he runs out and his coat comes off, which in ancient times means like they only really wore like an outer coat and then like maybe some stuff here. So he's basically just running around like almost naked to avoid temptation. So it sort of shows like the length that you're forced to go. He literally fled the scene. So the idea of running from temptation is one that we see over and over again in scriptures. So Paul actually says like 4 or 5 times, like, flee temptation. And sometimes we think, oh, you know what? Like, that's probably metaphorical, like, flee temptation, like, maybe I should, like, I don't know. But, like, Paul's saying, I believe Paul's saying, and what Joseph demonstrates, is, like, flee. So, like, if I don't know what a good example of is, but if I'm tempted by the jujubes, for example, which I am. So what I've done in the past is it's like, okay, I have this bag of jujubes. I'm like, no, I'm not going to touch it. I used to actually, when I had the 8 bags, I kept them on the top of like my shelf, and I'd be like watching TV, and I'd be like, blah, 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 watching TV, and all of a sudden I'll look down, and there's like a bag of jujubes beside me, and like I don't remember getting up and grabbing them, but somehow I did. So eventually what I did was I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. So I threw them out. So like I literally that was my way of running from temptation. So one reason this is important is shown in our passage. Temptation doesn't go away without a fight. It comes back over and over again, right? Jesus was tempted 3 times, and it said that he was tempted after that again. But running from is only half the story. So 1 down, I believe? Yes, and then next one. Thank you. Okay, so running from is only half the story. When we're dealing with temptation, we do not only need to run from, we also need to have something to run to. Right? So we're not just running aimlessly in no direction. The idea of pursuing God to resist temptation is one that's talked about by Jesus, or by James, who says, submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So we're running from temptation, and we're running to God. This brings to mind the psychologist, Bruce Alexander at SFU. Anybody know Bruce? No, I don't either, but you guys are closer to him than I am. SFU, who performed a series of experiments with looking at addictions with rats. So traditional studies found that rats, basically experiments on rats with morphine. So they'd be like, hey rat, in the cage, would you like some morphine? And the rat's like, yes please. And he would have them. So traditional studies found that rats would choose morphine 100% of the time, even over food and drink. But Alexander thought that with those experiments, which had rats alone in cages with food and water, so by themselves in a metal cage, you have food, water, and morphine. What are you gonna... Morphine. So he thought that they were sort of like artificial environments. So what he did instead was he put them in what he called Rat Park, which was a place where they were able to roam and play. There was sort of natural surroundings, and there's lots of rats together. So it was like a community. So then when they added morphine in after that, nobody went for it. Like none of the rats went and had any of the morphine. They had all their needs met, and they didn't need anything more. So when we flee from temptation and flee to God, pursuing Him with all that we are, we find that while we are still tempted, temptation is less and less appealing. We have found something far superior to the money, sex, and power that the world can offer. So there's an old English hymn, and it says, and I think it's sort of applicable here. And it says, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and all of the earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. So the more that we fix our eyes on Jesus, the more that he becomes sort of the center point of who we are, then the more worthless temptation, things that could be temptations are when we're faced with the most worthful thing there is, which is Christ. So how do we combat temptation? We can do the next one, I believe. Jesus was quick to reply to Satan with a Bible verse, but it's not really just memorization that will help you. We know that because Satan himself was memorizing Bible verses. It's a relationship and a dependence on God that allows you knowledge and supplies you the courage to resist by spending more time with the one greater than any temptation, Jesus Christ. So a catchphrase to take away from here is, the more attractive God, ooh, look at this, and we're pausing halfway. I'm just like leaving you guys on the cliff here. So the more attractive God is, what? The less attractive temptations are. And then next slide. So the final takeaway here is, when our identities are securest in God, we are surest to be tempted. Temptation comes in a variety of forms, but a knowledge of God is the key to defeating it. The stronger our relationship with God, the more attractive He is to us. And the more attractive He is to us, the less attractive temptation will be. Yeah. And I think that's pretty much it. And thank you so much for letting me come and speak. And this is awesome. And does anybody have any questions?
I have a comment.
Yes.
You did better than Tony.
Whoa, that's not a very nice thing to say. I bought you with candy, so it doesn't count. Yes.
It's short and good. It's better than Pastor Tony's.
Okay, let's stop.
Whoa. Hey, you know what? Tomorrow, Tony is going to come and speak at my youth group, and I'm pretty sure that my youth will have a different thing to say. So, yes.
What's the name of the professor in the study?
Oh yeah. So that his name is Bruce Alexander, I believe. But let me just double check. Yeah. Bruce Alexander, and it's called Rat Park. So there's a graphic novel out of it. They put the study in a comic strip, so it's kind of cool.
Wait,
yes.
So you're saying that the key for going against temptation is the knowledge of God, the relationship with God, right?
Correct. Yes. Definitely. In the back.
What food group is pizza?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, pizza is one of the ones that is actually what we call, at least in sort of my circles, it's kind of like a staple, right? So it's really nice because it has bread, it has vegetables, it has meat, and has cheese. So really, it's all you really need. It in itself is all the food groups. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
That's a signature question. Is pizza is a vegetable or fruit?
It's only fruit if you have Hawaiian. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Is there anything else?
No, just pray.
Yes, pray. Okay. I will pray now. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today and the fact that we get to come and worship you and talk about you. And I just pray for this group and for us as we struggle with temptation, that you can allow us to run from temptation, run to you, to fix our eyes on you, and to have you be everything to us. In your name I pray. Amen.
All right. Where is your youth church?
Oh, it's in Abbotsford.
Abbotsford.
Yeah.
Let's work.